Welcome to Cybersecurity Awareness TV, episode number 410, folks. Recorded October 29th, 2022. My name is Mac Jackson Jr., your cybersecurity consultant and researcher. If this is the first time you have seen our show here, I discuss cybersecurity awareness news, interviews, and tips that you could use today to protect yourself from the fastest growing crimes of the 21st century, folks. I want to thank everybody who's been a part of our show over all these years here on WWDBTV and supporting our message to get this information out to you about the threats and the risk of cyber crimes. If you'd like to know more about my company and what we do here, you can find me on MacJacksonJr.com. That's MacJacksonJr.com. Hey folks, remember on social media to share, like, subscribe, and hit that notification button to keep informed on the latest tips going on in cybersecurity awareness. And folks, also, we're on the Patreon channel at patreon.com/MacJacksonJr. Folks, in today's episode, our first segment, we're going to discuss hackers, how they are attacking our infrastructure and what we are doing in the government and for businesses to protect this infrastructure. For this month, folks, is cybersecurity awareness. And there are things that you can do to protect yourself from these types of cyber crimes. In our second segment, we'll discuss the FBI warnings with businesses, right? What businesses should be concerned about regarding the cyber threats. And of course, in our third segment, like we do every week, we always give cybersecurity tips that you could use to protect yourself today. In our first segment, folks, our top story, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The news around the world regarding cyber attacks that we're going to discuss with you here. Here are stories that I have researched for you from around the world relating to cyber attacks and how other nations are looking at their cyber attacks and how it's affected them. It's the same here in the U.S. And starting here, we'll talk in our U.S. system from the Cybersecurity Director of U.S. Intelligence of Homeland Security, Chris Krebs. He talks to CBS News Face the Nation regarding the insider and outsider threat of cyber crimes within organizations and on a larger scale, and the effect of our election that's coming up November 8th, folks. Make sure you vote. Here is one of our first stories I'd like to share with you from CBS News Face the Nation.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Chris Krebs. Good morning. Good to have you here in person.
Morning.
I want to ask you first about hurricane response, because you were involved back in 2017 with the response to Hurricane Maria, which just devastated Puerto Rico. What are the biggest challenges you see right now, both for that island and for this devastation in Florida?
Well, I think the first issue is the devastation, as you mentioned. What structures, what communities can actually take power? I think in general, and speaking with the power restoration task forces, they've done a good job of marshaling resources, getting linemen and crews down into the areas that can actually be restored. But as you heard from the mayor and the administrator, there are areas that simply just cannot take power right now, and it's going to take time to evaluate, see if they're condemned or otherwise. And so, but again, the power teams have done a good job in Florida, and they've actually, I think, done a good job in Puerto Rico as well after Fiona. When you're looking at, 10 days after Fiona, 90% of the power is restored. In Maria, that took about 7 months. And
they're still, in many ways, on the recovery track from Maria.
Yeah, I think over the last few years, they have done a better job of management, of investment, and of maintenance. But now they're at a position where I think they have to think about upgrading the system. They're still a fairly antiquated, older system, and they do have to kind of move forward with that.
I want to ask you about infrastructure beyond hurricane, of course. We are, 36 days from the midterms? You have large displacement now of people in Florida. Is that going to have an impact on the ability to carry out elections?
There are plans in place, and we heard the senator talk about Hurricane Michael from 2018, which Mexico Beach was devastated. There are rules and systems in place that allow for some flexibility in how the elections are conducted, and they will ensure that those that want to vote can vote. If I've seen anything, it's election officials are natural crisis managers and really good at the resilience side of it.
Well, they have to be right now, given all the pressures on them. switching to the cyber front. So you were in office during the midterms in 2018, and Cyber Command was pretty explicit that they went on the offense to protect our midterm races at that time, taking out Russian operatives to deter spreading disinformation. Right. We know they're watching what's happening this year. What does that look like? What does protecting our election against foreign interference look like?
Well, as I look at the concerns around the 2022 midterm elections, I have three primary areas of focus. First is the continued domestic efforts to undermine the process, attack workers. The second is this increase in insider risk. And as that all kind of manifests in political instability here domestically, it gives a lot of opportunity and attack surface for the bad guys. We've seen over the last couple of years, the foreign actors, that is, we've seen the Iranians, we've seen the Russians, and even recently we've seen the Chinese start to take some of the Russian plans, and it's almost Russification of Chinese information operations. So what I would look at is more, plagiarizing domestic issues and driving wedges into the discourse here in the U.S. Probably not manufacturing new narratives or anything like that, but instead really hitting on the issues that we're already talking about here and just making them that much more heated.
Meta took down a small Chinese network trying to influence elections. This is the Facebook sphere.
Right.
Is that the prime platform for disinformation?
Well, I think they're using a number of different techniques, and that's the Chinese. Again, it's still fairly rudimentary and remedial in terms of the Chinese influence operations. Once they get a little bit more sophisticated, I think that's where they're probably going to have a greater impact. But it's not just online. It's not just the social media platforms. They're actually working at the local levels to support individual candidates. And this is some reporting, I think, that may come out in the near future, but it's the Chinese have been very, very active at a local corruption level, where the Russians are more focused at the top on, the more disrupting the election process. A good friend in the intelligence community has said, Russia is the hurricane, China's climate change in the sense of political interference.
The sort of slow creeping coming up on you. I just want to come back. You said insider risk to U.S. elections. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's actually, we're seeing actual election workers that have been swept up in the continued efforts to delegitimize the 2020 election. And now they're on the inside. They're posing a risk. We've seen in Mesa County, Colorado, Coffee County, Georgia, Antrim County, Michigan, where workers have allowed access by unauthorized people into the system and access to equipment. And even just the other day in the primaries, we saw that there was a worker that plugged a USB drive into a machine, and now those systems have been rendered or taken out of service. So we actually, rather than just the foreign interference threats that I think we really had to think about in 18 and 20, now we have actual insiders. We have election workers that are posing a risk to the process itself.
Well, that's terrifying. Why? I mean, so part of the balance for anyone who was in a role like you had, how much do you publicize? How much do you draw attention? And at what point does that undermine confidence rather than raise confidence in integrity?
That's the challenge.
Is the administration doing enough on what you just laid out?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that there are a lot of tools right now available to counter both threats to election workers, and we continue to see death threats and under intimidation means against election workers, but then election workers themselves that have been, again, swept up into the process. So the tools aren't necessarily there. We do need local law enforcement, I think, to get more involved in investigating threats, protecting election workers themselves, ensuring that they're not being doxxed or their public information or their personal contact information is being released so they get more threats. So this is an area that I think Congress needs to take a hard look at. Are the right deterrence measures in place from criminal statutes? And then do we have the investigation techniques? It is, I personally have received a significant number of death threats and other threats, and some of them come in through anonymous, through anonymous means like proton mail. We do need more attention on these threats. Yes. Otherwise, we're going to see a shortage of election workers.
That is quite a warning. Chris, thank you for joining us.
And again, folks, November 8th, make sure you vote. We need to protect our democracy. Like the director, Chris Krebs, has stated, the threats of the elections are very, very important. And there has been rumors of the election officials being threatened at polls and cyber attacks threatening the voters with false information and disinformation that are out there. But folks, information from our officials have stated that our elections are more protected now than any time in our history because we're on top of it and the officials are also on top of it. To emphasize this point, I'd like to show you another story from CBS News and continue this investigation from CBS News Face the Nation. Check this out.
We turn now to threats to election security and efforts to combat false information online. We're joined by CBS News cybersecurity expert and analyst Chris Krebs and Kara Swisher, tech journalist and host of the podcast On with Kara Swisher and Pivot. Good to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
We were just talking about this with Dr. Gottlieb. But on the election front, and Kara, I want to start with you. There have been these recent studies talking about Facebook, TikTok, approving even ads with political misinformation on them. How does this continue to happen with vaccines and with political misinformation? Why can't these platforms get control?
Because they don't want to make those decisions. They want to opt themselves out of decision making on editorial. And you heard Nick Clegg, who's running, is number 2 at Facebook right now, essentially, just gave an interview where he talked about that. We shouldn't be the arbiters of this. We shouldn't do this. It should be government. But then we have the First Amendment, so government can't intercede. So I think they don't. There's just so much of it, and it floods the zone so much, and they make money from it that they don't want to. They don't want the responsibility for it, even though it's on their platforms, and they should have the responsibility.
And some of it sort of dances or flirts with distortions. And so you have to be in that government business of spotting this. But Chris, how do you even do that?
Well, it's a challenge, as Kara points out, with the First Amendment issues. DHS launched their Disinformation Governance Board earlier in the year, and that was not actually met with any kind of fanfare, and they ultimately stood it back down, even though efforts they were taking through that group have been underway for a decade or more within DHS. So one of the things that we looked at back in the 2020 election was not so much the specific claims or the specific elements of mis or disinformation, but it was more the thematics that were emerging. So not pinning it to a single individual, instead looking at, hey, these are some of the claims we were seeing, and here are the security controls or preventions in place that would actually not allow that to happen in an election. And we're seeing some continuation of that. But once again, there's so much of it, and once it hits, it's really hard to go bit by bit and pull it back.
I want to show our viewers some of the video that our CBS affiliate out in Arizona filmed multiple incidents of possible voter intimidation. They had armed individuals wearing tactical gear, as you can see there, camped out by a voter drop box. There were other 2 with handguns that were concealed yesterday. So some of this is driven towards a very specific conspiracy that emerged, right? So, Chris, how does the FBI head this off and not allow it to go into political violence?
Well, I think the important thing here is that if any voter or election official sees these sort of things happening in Arizona, they make a report. They tell the relevant officials, and they can investigate, and they can look at these people, they can investigate, and then there's a deterrent measure.
But it takes the guy with the tactical gear before that happens?
Well, and that's the biggest challenge here, as I see it, is that the continued efforts to delegitimize the 2020 election are resulting in candidates that are incentivized to push these lies, but also then you have a radicalization and activation across the voter base that are effectively, this is performative. This doesn't happen. The claims of mules and ballot trafficking, it doesn't happen, particularly in a way that someone like this would be able to detect anything. Moreover, what's happening is the people that are being accused of ballot trafficking or being a mule actually report it to the officials and say, here's my name, here's my contact information, I was accused of this. Would any legitimate fraudster or mule do that and then report that on themselves? Of course not. So it's all performative, and unfortunately, I am concerned that it results in violence.
Chaos is the point.
Yes.
Chaos and discord. It's actually from the Russian playbook.
Yeah.
Chaos is what they want. Discord, problems, making people radicalizing people, and it's in the mainstream. Before it was sort of, it bubbles up from the bottom, but now it's pushed down from the top. And so just last night you saw Trump say a number of things that were radicalizing. I don't know what else to say it. And so that goes down, and then it goes back up, and it's hit the mainstream now. They don't even need these ads or anything else because it's now infected some of the public so much. And so this is where people get their news, a lot of news. And before this, we had sort of information obesity. Not enough people got good news. Now they get a lot of information, but not actual facts.
We're going to take a quick break and come back, talk more about this in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with Chris Krebs and Kara Swisher. Kara, I want to pick up with you. We've been talking about social media. Twitter may find a new buyer, billionaire Elon Musk.
Friday.
On Friday's a day, I believe.
Supposedly.
Senator Mark Warner, who chairs the Intel Committee, has said that there is no American more dependent upon the largesse of the Communist Party than Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, the rocket ships. Bloomberg saying that the administration is going to have to do national security reviews, potentially, of businesses he owns. Sure. So how much of a risk is it if this transaction goes through?
It depends on what they find, I guess. I mean, I think the issue is he already does a lot of defense work, a lot with the rockets and everything else, and is considered very innovative and has done amazing things. The International Space Station depends on Elon Musk and his rockets. And so he does a lot of, obviously with transportation, that's another area that's important to look at, and who owns it. And Twitter also, this is a big communications platform, even though it's a terrible business. So who owns it matters. And so who are his investors, who is putting money into it, et cetera, should be looked at. It's as a matter of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost kind of amazing, Chris, that there isn't more scrutiny. I mean, there is FCC scrutiny of ownership of news organizations. Right. When it comes to social media and a company like TikTok, it's owned by a Chinese firm. An increasing number of Americans are relying on it for actual news, not just tweeting about themselves, but actual news. Is this a risk?
Well, I think just to your point, as more people use these platforms, as they get more information, as they're shifting away from traditional media that we're all used to, the intelligence services of our adversary are seeing this shift as well. And so it's not necessarily specifically about TikTok. It's all platforms and it's all avenues. But TikTok represents a specific risk. And a colleague of mine wrote a paper, Dakota Carey wrote a paper for Cyberscoop, talking about how it's not necessarily the data security challenges. It's that the Chinese Communist Party may have the ability through the parent company of TikTok to actually shape narratives, suppress, lift, shape what we see on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to be everything you see all the time. Mm-hmm. It can just be enough. Yeah. It can just be enough, a little bit. And I think about what happens if the Chinese invade Taiwan. What happens in the run-up to the 24 election if they're not happy with some of the more, the stronger stance that this administration is taking against China? There's a significant amount of risk exposure we have here.
And then who owns Twitter? Who are its investors? I think that's a normal question for a government to ask. Mm-hmm. The CCP doesn't own CBS, to my knowledge. So,
the Chinese Communist Party, no. But for Elon Musk, I know you know him. And last question here on this: Russia watcher Fiona Hill said Putin plays the egos of big men, gives them a sense that they can play a role, but in reality, they're just direct transmitters of messages from Vladimir Putin. She just gutted Elon Musk when he was pushing pro-Russia positions. I mean, is it really that? I mean, are our adversaries using business icons to further their foreign policy?
Why, yes, that's happened before. I don't know if you've heard about President Donald Trump. I mean, people have talked about that. So, yeah, I think Elon's doing this on his own. But he's a lot of people in Silicon Valley are also mouthing the same thing. There's sort of a certain class of tech bros that are into this idea.
But you still think this transition?
Well, they have no foreign policy experience, so they have no business doing this. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't stop them, which is about everything. They're experts on everything. Because they're the richest people in the world, in case you didn't know. So I think it's slightly dangerous. I don't know, Chris.
A little bit.
We could keep talking about this. I want to keep talking about this, but I have to take a break here.
As you can see, folks, hackers continue to look for ways to exploit vulnerabilities of all of us, businesses, small, medium, large, micro businesses, large corporations, etc. And they're trying to do this from around the world. Here's a story I'd like to share with you from Australia, where there has been a tremendous increase in cyber attacks, and the government there are calling for all businesses to harden their cybersecurity initiatives surrounding information system protection. Here's a story from Sky News Australia.
Well, we've just heard the macroeconomic view. Let's now get a sense of how the small business sector's feeling and what policies it's hoping to see at the budget. Well, joining me now is Alexi Boyd, the Chief Executive of COSBOA. Alexi, thanks for your time today. Let's start with cybersecurity. We've seen some major companies attacked recently, like Optus and now Medibank. What's your reaction to the Medibank attack, and how threatened are small businesses to ransom attacks like this?
Well, what this shows us is that every company is vulnerable, and all companies need to improve their cybersecurity initiatives in order to make sure that they're not the victim of an attack. And certainly small businesses need to work on their cybersecurity initiatives to make sure that they're protected against this sort of thing. All corporations, all small businesses are vulnerable to attack. Our survey has found that almost half of attacks more recently have been targeted at small businesses. So this Cyber Wardens initiative is about empowering them to improve the cybersecurity awareness and mitigating risks within their business so that they can protect themselves, their customers' data and the future of their business.
What support are you getting with your Cyber Wardens program from Telstra and the Commonwealth Bank?
Well, we're pleased to be partnering with Commonwealth Bank and Telstra for this particular initiative. We're also working with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, who are providing us with support and all the information. The Commonwealth Bank and Telstra obviously have large small business customer bases, and we're hoping to roll out this program and target as many small businesses as possible to improve their cybersecurity and mitigate those risks. The concept is that a small business person chooses an employee, or perhaps themselves or their trusted advisor, to take on the understanding of what they need to do as a small business owner to mitigate the risk for cybersecurity. And then that person is actually empowered through micro-credentials and a recognised micro-credential, so that when they move on to the next position or the next small business, they take that information with them. So the Cyber Wardens initiative is about empowering more small business employees to really have a good understanding of what's required, but also to teach others within the small business and within the community as well.
Do you think these attacks on Medibank and Optus have been a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of business owners out there to these cyber risks?
Absolutely. Small businesses are very cognizant of the risk of cyber attacks. The problem is they're not entirely sure how to mitigate the risk within their business. And this program is designed by small businesses for small business. And the concept is to look at what are relatively non-technical options to make sure that they empower themselves and their employees to do the right thing. 19 out of 20 attacks are actually caused by human error, and meaning that the small business owner can have up to $50,000 in costs, not to mention that the time that it takes to rebuild after a cyber attack and the reputational damage. We're seeing it happen at the corporate level, and small businesses will work harder to mitigate their risk as well.
Let's talk federal budget. Obviously, there's a lot of skills shortages with small businesses complaining about a lack of employees. What can the government do in this budget to encourage more people to enter the workforce to help those businesses?
Well, we know from small businesses and from our members that the number 1, 2 and 3 issue right now is skill shortages and worker shortages. What we'd like to see the government do is put small businesses first when they're thinking about the strategic planning and the workforce planning into the future. So we've got options such as a small business commissioner specifically in the Jobs and Skills Australia section, for instance. That's a way of putting small businesses first, understanding that the needs of small businesses are very different to those of big business, particularly when it comes to skills. And the forward planning for workforce strategies, it's very important that we think of small businesses and what their needs are. And to include small business associations in that strategic planning is so important because they really know what the future of their workforce needs are.
You're also calling for an extension to the budget program, which helps give young women confidence to become entrepreneurs. Is this program simply going to come to an end if it's not funded again this year?
Well, we'll continue to seek funding from multiple sources, but absolutely this has been a critical program to encourage young women and young girls to think about what the future of entrepreneurialism looks like for them. It helps them to start a business, it helps them to understand how you can take something from a concept to a minimum viable product and beyond. And we're really thrilled that it's something that's recognised within the school curriculum nationally. So importantly, it's something that teachers can pick up and use in the classroom, and it's actually compliant with the school school curriculum. So we think it's a really important program, particularly looking at the future of women in the workforce, women in small business, and this is the next generation of women female founders, and we'd like to see that continue.
And can you just explain to us what least cost routing is and why should it be introduced for retailers or other businesses out there with EFTPOS terminals?
So an increasing cost for small businesses is the cost for their debit card transaction fees. And least cost routing is about making sure that the cost of that transaction always goes through the least cost, which in Australia is generally the EFTPOS route. But it's about making sure that that's the default. So small businesses don't have to work their way through all of the different options to find out what the best option is for them. It should be a default that they're paying the least amount for those debit card transactions. And those are increasing as we use our mobile wallets more and as we use, tap and go, or we're using it in online payments. Increasingly, people are turning to debit card transactions, and those fees are quite high. So what we'd like to see is that the default is the least cost, and then if the banks or the payment institutions want to offer a better product or perhaps a faster gateway or perhaps better cybersecurity on their payments, then they upsell to the business. But the basic cost should be the least cost for small businesses. It's costing tens of millions of dollars a month for small businesses, and it's something that the government can do to save small businesses money, particularly in the retail sector.
And how do you rate your chances of getting some of these policies or all of these policies funded and approved by the government at this budget?
Well, the government said that they were turning their attention to small businesses in a number of ways, and this is a really good opportunity for them to show that they want to support small businesses as female founders. They'd like to see a lower cost for small businesses with things like least cost routing, and the opportunity is there for the future planning for small businesses with things like the instant asset write-off. We've got a number of measures in our pre-budget submission that we'd like to see the government adopt as soon as possible to alleviate the pressures on small businesses in whatever way that they can.
So are you feeling pretty hopeful about budget on Tuesday?
We're hopeful that the government is going to prioritise small businesses as the engine room of the economy and the importance placed on small businesses within the community. It's very important that we look after small businesses so that they can continue to employ, so they can continue to be a fundamental part of the community by supporting others. You only have to look around the country and see what's happening with the floods to see how the community supports small business and how small business steps up to support its local community. And so we'd like to see structural reforms to make it easier to run a small business, but also putting small businesses first to make sure that we retain those small businesses and look after their resilience way into the future.
Well, Lexi Boyd, Chief Executive of COSBOA, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. Thank you for coming back. Let me tell you, this is amazing what's going on now from around the world, from Australia to the US to over in Europe, England, Germany, Asia. All types of cyber threats are affecting all of us. We must do our part in hardening our cybersecurity protections to protect ourselves. But for us in the U.S., remember, folks, November 8th, make sure that you vote early. If you haven't done already, some states have already started early voting. Vote now. We need to protect and save our democracy. And folks, like we always say here on Cybersecurity Awareness TV, hashtag stay cyber woke. We'll be back after these messages. Hello, folks. This is Mac Jackson Jr. from Vanderson Cyber Group. The problem with businesses today is that they are affected by cyber attacks from around the world, but companies are not sure of what to do. Normally, they are reactive instead of proactive. But folks, cyber attacks can affect your bottom line and will affect you financially, legally, and your business reputation. Here at Vanderson Cyber Group, we can help you develop a policy by training your employees on what to do if they are involved in a cyber attack and how to mitigate it and fight against it. Folks, we call it here hashtag stay cyber woke. And that's Vanderson Cyber Group here in Las Vegas and around the world. You can reach me, folks, at vandersoncybergroup.com or my website, macjacksonjrjr.com as well. Here locally, 702-868-0808. Give us a call today, folks. We must fight back. Hi folks, welcome back to Cybersecurity Awareness TV. In this segment, we're talking about FBI warnings, how FBI is suggesting to businesses to work in collaboration with the government on mitigating the cyber attacks that are affecting their business. But before we get started, I want to give a plug really quick for one of my sponsors, Jacoby's Menswear. Yes, that's right, folks. Jacoby's Menswear helped put together my suits and my wardrobe for this segment. And I want to let you guys know that if you're looking for suits here in Las Vegas, Nevada, definitely check out Jacoby's Menswear at 3720 West Tropicana. That's 3720 West Tropicana. When you're there, tell them Mac Jackson sent you. Jacoby's Menswear. All right, folks. In this segment, this is regarding FBI warnings. In our show, we have focused on several stories about cybersecurity attacks from around the world, how hackers are looking for vulnerabilities to try to acquire your information, your data, to sell to other bad guys on the internet. And we've discussed that companies must put together policies and principles within organizations to protect their business. This is very, very important, even if you are a small company like a micro business. Now, a micro business is an organization or enterprise with less than 10 employees. Less than 10 employees, folks, with a revenue in some jurisdictions no more than $250,000. However, folks, large corporations, the ones that we're noticing in the media, those organizations, the CEOs, chief information officers, they make about $250,000 a year. So the small business owner cannot afford even to hire a CIO to work for organizations to protect them from these types of cyber threats. So what does that mean? That means these small micro businesses are very, very vulnerable. And there are hundreds of thousands of these businesses throughout our country that need to be protected. And they usually have one owner who's also doing the IT, who's also doing the web design, the accounting, all of that. They're very, very vulnerable to these attacks. So we must educate and let our small businesses and micro businesses know things that they can do to protect themselves from these cyber threats that can have havoc over their company. Here's a story from New England that shows, in Massachusetts, that shows that hackers are targeting businesses, and it's a warning coming out from the FBI in the state of Massachusetts this month, in our understanding of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, that FBI suggests think before you click, folks. Emails, SMS messages, all of that. Story comes from WCVB Channel 5 in Boston. Check this out.
There is a new warning from the FBI about cyber attacks on private businesses here in New England.
5 investigators sitting down with the special agent in charge for an exclusive interview tonight on this threat and how a local vaccine maker is helping to fight it. Our Karen Anderson is here to explain. Karen.
And Ed and Maria, here in Massachusetts, we have a lot of high-profile targets for cyber criminals. We have Fortune 500 companies, leading hospitals, and biotech startups. Well, the FBI is asking companies of all sizes to reach out to them now to prepare for the possibility of a cyber attack. And they're sharing some new information about how they helped protect vaccine makers as part of Operation Warp Speed.
They would potentially become a target because of the types of things that they were working on.
In our one-on-one interview, Special Agent in charge of the FBI in Boston, Joe Bonavolanta, sharing how the FBI worked to protect Moderna and other COVID vaccine manufacturers during Operation Warp Speed. Weekly threat briefings to help them get into a cyber or counterintelligence mindset.
And in today's world, the security of our healthcare sector is of paramount importance.
Now, Bonavolanta and Moderna's Vice President of Corporate Security are releasing a new public service announcement, asking other private sector businesses to also team up with the FBI before an attack.
Remember, cyber risk is business risk.
The FBI says in Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, almost 15,000 victims reported losing $184 million just last year. Children's Hospital in Boston was targeted by attackers sponsored by the government of Iran.
It was simply because of a pre-existing relationship that we already had with them, where it was pretty seamless work back and forth, engaging in that multidisciplinary team concept, where we were able to pass along information for Boston Children's Hospital to act on it, that in essence wound up preventing a significant shutdown of their networks or systems.
And for private sector businesses that might be hesitant to call in the FBI, what do you want them to know?
Just establishing that that original relationship with us is very simple, just so that if a critical incident were to occur, we would already know who each other are. I think there's a myth out there that if we're called, the FBI is going to come roaring in with lights and sirens. That is not how we operate. In fact,
and the FBI says most of their cyber safety work is actually low-key, done right over the phone. Even after an incident, the FBI says they can respond discreetly. The bottom line, they say they can help companies prevent cyber attacks and mitigate them if they happen. Live in the newsroom, Karen Anderson.
Folks, in the world of cyber responses and incidents, investigators are growing around our country. In other words, there are good guys in this cyber war that look at these types of threats and they respond to them. But there's been an overwhelming number of these responses coming in from businesses and individuals like yourself. We need to hire more cybersecurity engineers and people available. So if you are a student, especially a student of mine where I teach, if you are a student looking to get into the world of cybersecurity, I definitely would like to motivate you and advise you to check out careers in cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity and as an analyst. Folks, again, this month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Scammers are continuing to look for new schemes, a way to get your data, either through phishing, emails, and even brazen enough to do phone calls where these hackers are trying to get you to extort your information from you. So it's very, very important to stay active and stay aware this month especially. I have another story to share with you coming from KHON2 out of Hawaii. Around the world, folks. Check the story out.
Scammers have absolutely no shame, and they will continue to come up with new schemes to steal your personal information. So it's important to protect yourself online, especially during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Joining us this morning is Ben Mendez, Chief Information Officer at the Hawaii State Federal Credit Union. Good morning, Ben. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, good morning, Ross. Doing well, thank you.
Now, first off, what can you tell us about National Cybersecurity Awareness Month?
Yeah, so National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is observed every October. It's a collaborative effort kind of between government and industry, and it ensures Americans have the resources they need to stay safe online and be more secure. So this year's theme at Hawaii State Federal Credit Union is Own It, Secure It, and Protect It, and will help encourage both personal accountability and focus on digital privacy. We talk about things like security best practices, and we go over common cybersecurity threats that our members see in the wild.
Now, why is cybersecurity so important to Hawaii State FCU?
Well, it isn't really just the number of cybersecurity attacks, Ross, that we're seeing increase. It's the overall sophistication. So if everybody remembers back 5 years ago in 2017, the attacks on Equifax that affected personal and financial information for about 150 million people in the United States. That's about half the population at the time, so it's a pretty significant impact. And it's only getting worse. Recent reports state that the cost of cybersecurity threats, they're going to rise, and we're seeing, up to $6 trillion annually. And it's just not corporate America paying the price anymore. It's the individuals who become victims of fraud and identity theft.
So, Ben, what are some online safety tips?
Well, going back to the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month theme, it's really to own it, secure it, and protect it. So let's just start with social media, right? This is something everybody uses. You probably know it's not a good idea to share your address or your phone number or your financial information on these social platforms. But what about the name of your pet or your favorite color, right? Or, your favorite food? These are all things that maybe you should be a little more anonymous. The second thing on social media is adjust your privacy settings. Stick with people you know. Don't share it with everybody public. These are things that can be used against you when somebody tries to do account compromise. Next thing we'll talk about is password managers, right? There's a lot of free and expensive ones, such as like LastPass and Keeper, that let you create and remember your passwords. They do all the work for you. You don't have to do any of the hard memorization here. You only have to remember one master password, like a passphrase. And generally, the way we explain it to our members is just go ahead and create a password that is a phrase, right? Starts with a capital, ends with a period, and just make it like a regular sentence. Usually you'll switch in a couple numbers like 2 and 4, but really it creates the long memorable password for your password manager. And lastly, it's multi-factor authentication. I think everybody's heard this already. It's probably your most effective control at protecting your identity online. The places you really want to be doing this is on your personal email and your financial portals. So any place where you're going to manage money online, make sure you've enabled multi-factor authentication.
Now, Ben, let me ask you this, because if you could recommend maybe 3 things for people that are watching this morning to do to secure themselves online, what would they be?
So I would probably go back to those 3 main points, right? So limit what you share with strangers on social media. That's number 1. Number 2, get yourself a solid password manager. At this point, everybody should have one. Most of the ones that you see that are used broadly are very secure and can be trusted. And lastly, that multi-factor authentication I think is key. At this day and age, if you don't have multi-factor authentication on your personal email, that's where a majority of the time we're going to be resetting passwords. And if somebody has access to that, they can get access to pretty much anything.
All right,
and here in Hawaii State.
Ben Mendez, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have a great day, and thanks for those great tips.
As you can see, folks, from around the world, there are organizations, governmental agencies that are looking for you as consumers and as business owners in understanding your responsibility in cybersecurity awareness. We must protect our infrastructure and protect our data from these types of cyber hackers. Only you can do that. But the best ways we can do it, folks, is letting people know what's going on and tell people that you know to be cautious and stay aware. We'll continue this discussion after these messages. Thank you, folks.
Hi, I'm Judy Mario. I invite you to watch my show, What's Your Story with Judy Mario on WWDBTV, where I interview celebrities, doctors, authors, professional speakers, and just plain folks like you and me. So watch my show and also watch some of the other great shows that we have here on WWDBTV, and you can also find us on Roku.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Cybersecurity Awareness TV. I'm your host, Mac Jackson Jr., your cybersecurity consultant. In this segment, we discuss what you can do to protect yourselves from these types of cyber attacks. As we do every week, we talk about tips and techniques. Again, I'll do the first tip that we talk about all the time, and that's the passwords. Yes, folks, passwords. It's become an interesting subject over the last couple of weeks. I've noticed questions coming in from my clients about situations such as, Mac, how can I manage all these different passwords? You tell us we have to have a different password for every website we visit. Yes, it is recommended from cybersecurity experts around the world, including myself, that you should have a password that is hard for a hacker to hack and easy for you to track. That can be difficult, especially when it suggests that your password should be at least 12 digits long. That's a lot. And it's a lot to remember, especially think of every website you visit. Think about it, folks. If you're visiting on average 50 websites that contain your personal, private, and financial information, trying to remember every website for those particular sites would be a bit horrendous, right? Trying to manage all of that. And as if you're one of my clients, I always recommend you never write your passwords down on a sheet of paper. Because what you've done, folks, when you write your passwords down on a sheet of paper, you have created currency out of thin air. So what should you do? You should, folks, make sure you have a password management system. Now, if you remember in our show, we had several clips where professionals and professional experts in cybersecurity stated that you should have a password management system to store and encrypt your passwords. So definitely check out a password management system. There are several of them out there. You can go to my website at macjacksonjr.com and look at our products and services and see password management software programs that I have endorsed and recommend for you to use. And my company, we're affiliate for some of them as well. But make sure, folks, that you have a password management system. What does that password management system do for you? They, again, will encrypt every password that you have within the websites that you visit. Right? Every password. All you have to remember is one password. Now, again, I emphasize the term password. Do not use a password, use a passphrase. In other words, you would use a statement. It could be an English sentence. It could be a saying. It could be your mission statement. Anything like that, it's important to you, and it'll make it harder for the hackers to try to figure out what your access is. So think of this, folks, and look into a password management system. The second one I recommend, folks, is to make sure that when you're on the internet with your phone, your smartphone. Yeah, that's right, folks. We're going to go to that smartphone test again. make sure that you turn off your Wi-Fi on your smart device. We are not at a location that you need to have access to your Wi-Fi. In other words, your smartphone, you have a data plan, and that data plan gives you internet access through your smartphone. You don't need to use a Wi-Fi to get access to the internet. When you do that, your phone doesn't know if the hotspot that it's going to connect to is secure or good or bad. It will jump onto any Wi-Fi location that it sees available. It will talk to it, and when it talks to it, it will get connected to the internet. However, folks, hackers that are out there that have little devices that we call in the industry pineapples, they're basically a small computer systems with antennas that are easy to establish and set up, that basically are transmitters of the internet signal. If this device are set in front of their window or in their home, you could be at a stoplight or in traffic on the freeway, and this device is basically sending a signal out to everybody out there stating that, hey, need to have access to the internet? We are available, I'm available. Your phone doesn't know that's a bad guy. It will jump to that device for that mere couple of seconds because you're traveling or you're stopped to get access to internet. So you could check on your emails or check on that bank account, right, folks? During that time, the hackers could possibly transmit malware onto your phone without you noticing it, and it'll take a second, if less than a second. Matter of fact, a second is too long. That's how fast it works, folks. So make sure you turn it off. Do not use it unless there is a need, or unless you know that the Wi-Fi that you are attaching to is secured. Now, with that stated, a lot of us will go to coffee shops or hotel rooms, right, to do our work when we're not connected to a secured Wi-Fi. Make sure that you have 2 pieces of software on your phone or your smart device. One is a VPN, which stands for a virtual private network. What this software will do, it will cloak and protect your machine and deter hackers from it because they can't see you on the internet. Now again, nothing's 100%. There's still hackers that can get past a lot of these VPNs that are out there. We've seen that as well. But it's best to have something versus nothing to protect your machine. Also, have antivirus software. What antivirus software does, folks, it keeps your machine up to date with what's going on right now with all different types of malware and devices and viruses that are out there. Because, folks, they're consistent. If you update your system on a Monday, on Friday, there's a total group of different malware devices and viruses that are out there that can attack your machine. So make sure you stay up to date with all of the latest software from your manufacturer and your antivirus software. Again, folks, nothing's 100%, but I tell you, it's best to have some shield than to have no shield at all, giving you this type of data protection. Folks, if you like this particular advice or these tips, and you understand, you want to find out more, contact my company and we can put together policies and procedures for your organization to help your employees understand their responsibilities in this cyber threat. We can provide email testing, phishing testing to make sure your employees are always suspicious of emails they're getting requesting information from them as an individual and as an employee of your organization, because hackers will try both ways to get your information, your data. Contact my company, Vanderson Cyber Group, that's Vanderson Cyber Group, for information on policy procedures and compliance with these new regulations and laws on cybersecurity awareness and education. Folks, that's all we have this week for you here on Cybersecurity Awareness TV. We hope you got a lot out of what we've presented to you and the value of it. And remember, folks, tell somebody what you've learned from the show. We must hashtag stay cyber woke. Until next time, folks, this is Mac Jackson, Cybersecurity Awareness TV. We'll see you next week.